I'm glad everyone could join us, and we have Tracy Spackman here today with us, who's a gentle sleep coach. And she's going to be talking about 5 things that might be keeping your baby from sleeping. And she has a great website that you should check out called getquietnights.com. And there's a lot of great resources on there. I've perused it quite a bit, and there are a lot of videos and podcasts and just some helpful tips to look into. And then, of course, you can contact her if you want to talk to her about individual needs and help with baby sleep. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and I'm really excited to hear all the information she's got for us today.
Thanks, Kristen. So the ages of the babies in this group. So the youngest sounds like seven days, 7 days old. And then the oldest is 6 months?
Mine is 7.5 months.
7.5 months? Okay, because I like to gear my comments towards the audience. It's because I'm not scripted. I have subjects that I want to talk about. Each of the 5 things, I actually am going to give you 6 things. There's bonus things to talk about. I've been a gentle sleep coach for, I keep having to add up how many years it's been, but about 8 years. And people always ask me if I did sleep coaching with my own kids, and I did not because I didn't know. It wasn't until my 5th child was 4 years old, when I was looking for a change in my life. I was recruited to be a sleep coach. I was invited to take the training, and I love being a mom. And so to help other moms do something important like parent with enough sleep was something that was fun to do. And so I took all the training and I became a sleep coach, and I realized all the things that I had done wrong as a mom. And yet my kids have turned out great. They are fantastic. I did cry it out with my kids when they were small, and looking back and like, oh, there was a much better, easier, more gentle thing that I could have done. But having that perspective when other moms do cry it out and then they decide that it wasn't for them, but they're not getting the sleep that they need, that I can relate to them. I know how they're feeling about it, and I have another option that I can share, something that's really gentle and hands-on. So since sounds like maybe none of you have given into the pressure to try cry it out, and maybe you want to try something totally different that's very gentle and yet completely supported by science, that's what I want to talk to you about. These things that we're going to talk about are the areas that you look at first before you would even consider doing any sort of stressful sleep plan. And hopefully you'll never have to do that, because you'll have all of these light bulb moments that come on for you that help you to get to a position where you don't actually have to do anything more than just these things. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Let's see how that works. And you can raise your hand, like physically raise your hand like this, so that I can see you. If you push the little raise your hand button, I don't usually see that as well, because I'm looking at this screen, and then I have you here. But if you go like this, then I'll notice you if you want to add something or interject or ask a question. All right. So can you see it? 6 things that yes, because I can't see what you see. I see you and I see my screen, and that's it. So 6 things, not 5, 6 things that keep your child from sleeping, keep your child awake. So the number 1, or the first thing that I want to talk about, is hunger. So babies wake up in the middle of the night because they're hungry. Of course they do. That's totally normal. Babies need to eat in the middle of the night. How frequently do they need to eat in the middle of the night? That's not really something that you can get from a book or from your doctor. It's something that you get from your baby. Your baby will tell you how often they need to eat in the middle of the night. And the range of normal is pretty broad, and then it changes as your baby wakes up. So does a 6-month-old or a 7.5-month-old need to eat every hour? Probably not. Probably not. And you probably intuitively know that Okay, this is a lot, but does a newborn need to eat every hour? Maybe. Especially if they have a tongue tie and they're not getting enough with each feeding, and that's difficult. And so a common range is every 1 to 3 hours in that newborn stage. Kristen, would you agree with that? Yeah. Okay. And then as they get older, it can get down to 3, 2, 1. I see a lot of 6-month-olds just doing 1, but some still need 3. I see a lot of 8-month-olds going all night, 12 hours without eating. But that doesn't mean that that's what it should be. That's what it could be for some babies. Other 8-month-olds still need to eat at least once in the middle of the night. So you have to figure out what your baby can do. And there are a lot of factors. So then as you're figuring this out and looking at the age and how hungry your baby is, there's a lot of things to look at. Is your baby eating regularly during the day? Are they getting a long stretch overnight, and how long is that stretch? And where is that stretch? Do you get your longest stretch of without eating at the beginning of the night, or do you get it at the middle or at the end? And so that longest stretch that they naturally do is a really good place to start. And then if you think that your baby's eating more than they need to, then you can play with it and you can try to stretch how long they're going. But that's not the first thing that you do. The first thing is you think, does my baby need to eat in the middle of the night? And if you're not sure and they're waking up asking for food, you don't make that decision in the middle of the night in that moment. They wake up, they're asking for food, you feed them, and then during the day when you're when you're meant to be awake and thinking, that's when you think about that and have those conversations to help figure that out. As your baby gets to a point where they're old enough to learn sleep skills, which let me tell you is typically over 4 months old. So you've heard of the Wonder Weeks, you've heard of developmental milestones. There's all of these developmental milestones and leaps that the baby brain goes through, and there's a lot of them. And as these skills are emerging, sleep often gets put on the back burner. So it's normal for sleep to fall apart and then get better, and then fall apart and then get better. And one of the major brain developmental milestones you want to get past is that 4-month sleep progression. And so once you're past that, that's a good time to start thinking about changing sleep skills, but it doesn't mean you should be thinking about sleep skills. If you're coping well and the middle of the night feeding is manageable and you're not feeling overwhelmed, it doesn't feel like it's crazy amount, then it's probably normal. You don't need to do anything and you can wait longer. If you can wait until over 6 months, that's much safer. But it's not a should at 6 months either. But I think that there's a shouldn't before 5 months. If your baby's under 5 months, you want to especially look at all of these things that we're going to talk about in Feed Your Baby, and not try to teach your baby to sleep through the night or to do super long stretches, because the brain can actually learn sleep skills at that age. It's like in kindergarten, they say to the kids, when my kids' classes all the time, they'd say, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. Have you ever heard that before? So when your baby is under 5 months old, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. And some babies need a lot of extra attention and some babies don't. And it's totally normal. So a baby's ability to sleep well it's very innate. Some babies can do it and some babies can't, and it's just part of the baby that you get. And then once they get past that 4 or 5 month old milestone, then the brain is just beginning to get to a place where you can actually make changes, and some sleep independent learning can happen. Did somebody raise their hand? Oh, I thought I saw this movement. Okay. And so you want to wait. And up until that point, there's a lot of coping that you do and looking at these other things that can affect sleep without actually doing any sleep teaching or sleep learning or sleep coaching. So hunger, if your baby is young, if in doubt, feed your baby, please. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about is going to bed too tired. So your body has a period of time that it can be awake. It's called the wakeful window. Have you heard that expression before? Nod your head, thumbs up. Wakeful window? Okay. So at the end of the wakeful window is a tiny little sleep window when the hormones are shifting. Melatonin is going up, cortisol is going down. And then if you miss the window, if your baby is not asleep by the end of that sleep window, then cortisol levels spike back up and it pushes the melatonin levels down. So then there's like a burst of energy. And your baby might look like they feel wired and tired at the same time. And then it's like they're cranky and they're frustrated. It was like there was a switch there that shifted. And if you are aware of this pattern, like, oh, I just missed the sleep window. My baby's having a cortisol rush. Other babies, instead of getting frustrated, they get giggly and they're hilarious. I call them a cortisol giggler, but you still missed the sleep window. So finding where that sweet spot is, where that sleep window is at bedtime, so that you can help them to fall asleep in their sleep window without getting this overtired cortisol rush that makes it really hard to fall asleep. So not only does missing that sleep window or going to bed too tired make it so it's harder for them to fall asleep, but it also makes it harder for them to stay asleep. The body or the brain cycles through these sleep cycles, and it's really complex. That little diagram makes it look like it's simple. It's not. It's extremely complicated. And so every time it cycles up, there's an arousal or a partial arousal, and you have extra cortisol in your system. It's really hard to get back down into sleep, and so the baby wakes up, and they need you to help them fall back to sleep, usually using whatever you did to help them at the initial bedtime. So figuring out where their sweet spot is so you're not putting them to bed too tired is something that you can do right from the get-go. And as the baby grows up, those sleep cycles and those sleep patterns change. So for a newborn, they're awake for a bit, then they sleep for a bit. They're awake for a bit, they're asleep for a bit, and there's not really that big long nighttime right away. But then as it begins to shift, then you notice that they have these longer streaks, or they wake up in the middle of the night, but they're able to go back to sleep pretty easily. Even if they wake up a lot, there's like a clear nighttime pattern and a clear daytime pattern. And the bedtime might not start until 9, 10, or 11 at nighttime, so the night is kind of short. And then as they get over 3 months, 4 months, then the baby is getting towards more of a 12-hour night. So then if they're waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, possibly they're moving towards more of a 6 o'clock bedtime. And some people think that 6 p.m. bedtime for a baby, that is so early, but that's actually really common and normal for sometimes as early as 3 months, but 4, 5, definitely 6, that try for a 12-hour night. So look at what time they wake up in the morning. 12 hours later, that is a good guess for what time that sweet spot is going to be around. And then you're watching their body language to figure out where that kind of fine tune where that sweet spot is. So you're looking for body language cues like zoning out, staring off into space, glassy eyes, disinterest. Lynette, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so you're talking about moving the bedtime earlier, and I'm wondering, is there a way to move the wake up time later? Just because of like our own schedules.
Sometimes babies are quite shiftable, and sometimes they're not.
Okay.
I have a family that I'm working with, and both of their children are like 5 a.m. wakers. I'm like, oh, 5 a.m. is so early. Even I consider that early rising, and I like early mornings. But 6 o'clock is actually really common. And once your child is sleeping well and has sleep skills and getting big solid chunks of sleep overnight, that's a good scenario to be in to try to shift it later. So the rest of the world has to do this shift twice a year. Every time daylight savings hits them, they have to go through this shift. And here in Arizona, we don't have to do that. But it's actually a very similar process. I have an article on my Facebook page that talks about daylight savings shifting, and it also can totally help with early rising shifting. And just doing it for an hour. But it's easier to do if your child is already has sleep skills than if you're trying to shift it at the same time that you're trying to work on sleep skills. The easiest way to shift, the easiest way to get sleep is to kind of find your baby's schedule the way that where it is, as long as it's not ridiculous. So if they're in a 6 to 6 range, between a 6 to 6 range or an 8 to 8 range, somewhere in that 6 to 8 wake up and 6 to 8 bedtime is very common and normal and healthy. So if your baby's somewhere in that range, just follow their body language cues before and help with sleep independence before you try to shift it. That'll make the shifting easier. So if you're doing a 8 or 9 o'clock bedtime, but your baby always wakes at 6, and then you're recognizing after I'm talking about this cortisol that, oh yeah, right after supper, my baby's like having meltdowns, and we call it the witching hour. Like, you probably have the wrong bedtime. Jump to 6 a.m. Don't move it back slowly. Just jump to that new time, where anytime after or anytime close to that 12 hours, that 12-hour mark from when they woke up, where do you see us slowing down, zoning out, staring off into space? That's it. You're in the window. Then followed by yawning, eye rubbing. You're at the end of the window, and then boom, burst of energy. Now you missed the window. So see if you can identify what body language cues your baby's body is trying to tell you, and then put them to bed earlier. And then that helps them to improve their nighttime sleepability. And then you could shift it if you still need to. Okay, next subject. This is very similar, nap deprivation. This is like missing the sleep windows that they're having during the day. So for a newborn, it's all over the it's all over the place. Naps really don't organize and develop into a more predictable or recognizable pattern, often until about 6 months old. So if you can be flexible, I heard about this, the 90-minute miracle. I don't know if there's a book called that or something, where they talk about the wakeful window of a young baby being 90 minutes. And that's totally a thing. So if your baby's over 3 months, possibly they fall into this 90-minute window. They wake up, 60 to 90 minutes later, they're ready for a nap. And then if they had a short nap, 60 to 90 minutes later, they're ready for another nap. If they had a longer nap, longer being 45 minutes or longer, then maybe it's closer to 90 minutes. But 90 minutes is a pretty good average for how long a newer baby can be awake, from like 3 to 6 months. And the first wakeful window and the last wakeful window may be short, like an hour, but 90 minutes between sleeps throughout the day is totally normal. But don't take my word for it. Watch your baby's body language, see what body language cues that they give you, and write it down. Look for the pattern. There may be a pattern there that you can follow. And then you figure out, do I have a time baby or an interval baby? Is your baby ready for a nap at the same times throughout the day? And if you're writing it down, you'll see that pattern. Or do you notice those tired signs pretty close to 85 to 90 minutes after they woke up from the last nap throughout the day? Like, okay, so you either have a time baby or an interval baby. You're just looking for the patterns, trying to figure your baby out. Instead of putting your baby on a schedule that you read in a book, let your baby tell you what their schedule is by watching for those early tired signs. If you always wait for late tired signs like yawning and eye rubbing, you may have an alert temperamented baby whose sleep window was super short, and yawning and eye rubbing mean you're on the verge of missing the window. So you don't want to wait for that. See if you can identify the earlier tired signs, and then help your baby to fall asleep at the times that their body cues are telling you. And you don't need to worry about it always being in their crib or it always being at home. When you're working on sleep skills, get the naps any way possible. Rock, hold, nurse, drive. If putting your baby down in their crib just makes them cry, they're not going to sleep. We need to get those naps in order for the nights to come together. So I have a visual for you. I call it the building blocks of sleep. Okay, so first, the foundational building block is day sleep. These are naps. You want to get the day sleep any way possible, and your focus is watching body language and then helping them to get that sleep. If you can get 3 or more sleep cycles in a day, that would be great, but 3 hours or so throughout the day is great, but it's not really about how much. It's mostly about catching the window and following the body language. Because some babies, they only do these 20 to 30-minute naps because they're so alert or so aware. There's so much going on around them that the parents can't control. And so that baby would need 5 or 6 or 7 of these little cat naps throughout the day, and then that could still be good day sleep. And then another family may be able to get 1 or 2 hour naps throughout the day. Well, they may need just 3 of those. And then that would be following the baby's body language, and that would be a good nap day for that baby. But following the body language, get as much day sleep as your baby can do, and use those crutches to your advantage to get it Don't worry about anything else. Just follow the body language. Okay, so then the next building block of sleep.
Tracy, I
Yes?
just have a question. For newborns, I know it's very different, but is it kind of the same premise? Like you're still looking for those cues to help them get to sleep. You know,
Yeah.
not
Yes.
often, but
Yes, when your baby is brand new, you're trying to get to know your baby. Have you you probably tell people all that all the time. Your number one priority when you have a newborn is to get to know your baby and let your baby get to know you. And I remember them saying that to me, like, what does that mean, get to know my baby? It means that you're trying to figure out what expressions, what mannerisms does your baby do to tell you when they're hungry, to tell you when they're tired, to tell you when they're upset, to tell you when they're seeking closeness. You're trying to read your baby's body language, and that is getting to know your baby. Yes, it's right from the get-go. You're trying to figure out what your baby's body language is telling you when they're ready for sleep.
great, thank you.
Okay, so get the day sleep any way possible. Then you would work on night sleep. And I wouldn't really work on night sleep until after 5 months old or later or longer. But if you don't have the day sleep, it's really hard to get the night sleep because this naps are foundational. Then you get the night sleep and you can work on skills and you could do some sleep coaching and some gentle methods. And then as the naps become more predictable, then you can work on how they nap and work on nap skills. So here, get the naps any way possible, then work on night skills, then work on nap skills. So while you're working on night skills, you're still crutching the naps. Rock, hold, nurse, drive, whatever works. And then you could undo crutches for nights. And then you could undo crutches for naps if you still want to. Some people, they never want to and they don't have to. And it's fine. So naps is next. Getting naps any way possible helps with nights. Lynette.
So I'm curious, right around 6 months, really until Kaya was 6 months old, she was doing those 20-minute cat naps, like 5 or 6 a day. And we were watching the sleep windows, and like every 90 minutes, we were getting her down for those, mostly in a carrier. And then we finally were like, maybe, because we couldn't get her to sleep for longer than 30 minutes ever. So we finally decided to try to spread it out. And we're now just a month and a half later, we're doing 2 naps a day at 10 and 2, and they're lasting 1 to 2 hours. And it changed like pretty dramatically when I spread it out and kind of tried to get her more tired. But I'm wondering if that's also screwing up our nights. Like maybe she's overtired or somehow that's not working with her rhythm. It's been a huge relief for the day, but then at the same time, our nights have flipped upside down in the same timing.
Yes. I call that getting a cortisol response when your nights fall apart because your wakeful windows throughout the day are too long. You're trying to find a balance between sleep pressure and cortisol. So there's a few different hormones in play. So the longer that you're awake, the more the sleep pressure, which is a layman's term for a hormone whose name I can never remember. So I'll stick with sleep pressure. So sleep pressure goes up and intensifies the longer that you're awake. You feel more and more and more pressure to get tired. But every time you pass a sleep window, your cortisol levels jump up and your melatonin levels go down. And so you may notice that if you see a slowing down followed by a burst of energy, that burst of energy lasts about 45 minutes. So that's the cortisol rush, about 45 minutes. And then there's another sleep window, but there's increased sleep pressure. So it may be easier to fall asleep the more sleep pressure you have, but you've increased the cortisol levels, which make it harder to fall asleep and harder to fall back to sleep in the middle of the night. Because once the cortisol levels spike, that spiked cortisol level stays in the system for over 24 hours and just messes up your night. So Lynette, perhaps you need to add in another night and shorten your windows to keep them at 2 to 3 hours. I love a 2-hour schedule for a 7-8-month-old, and then at 8.5 I see it start to shift, and then by 9 months it's often a 2-3-4 schedule. But just like I said, you don't just because that is a common schedule or one that I might write in a book if I wrote a book, you want to follow the body language and see if you're noticing those cortisol spikes, which means you're possibly missing a sleep window, and you can find still get a good balance of good naps at daytime, but then lessen those cortisol spikes to help you to improve the nighttime. So I think you're on the right track there in that thought process. Okay, so let's talk about skills a little bit. Falling asleep independently without any assistance gets easier it's a skill that you can learn. Eventually everyone will sleep. So it's not really, sleep isn't really a learned skill, but falling asleep independently all by yourself with minimal protesting is a talent that can be developed and improved upon, and total sleep independence is really hard for some babies. And so if you're helping your child to fall asleep and you're putting them in bed asleep, because you nurse them to sleep, you rock them to sleep, you hold them to sleep, you drive them to sleep, you walk them to sleep, you bounce on an exercise ball until they're asleep. There's all these things that you can do to help them to fall asleep. So that's a sleep crutch, or it's a sleep association, sleep assistance. And so you help them to fall asleep. And in many scenarios, that's appropriate, it's healthy, it's easy, it's normal. But if they're waking up in the middle of the night, they're looking for that to help them fall back to sleep in the middle of the night. So if you think your baby is old enough to learn sleep skills, so usually at least over 18 weeks, over 5 months, please over 6 months if you can wait that long, at least, then this would be something that you can try to change. Help your baby to go to bed more awake. Now there's this drowsy but awake concept that works for a lot of babies, but it doesn't work for all babies. Now we're getting into temperaments. Different temperamented babies have different abilities to relax and fall asleep. And if you have a very alert temperamented baby, then this baby is very aware, noticing extra details, maybe more sensitive, maybe more tenacious, determined, strong-willed, and then they just really resist falling asleep. And so drowsy but awake doesn't work for a baby with those temperaments. And so then instead of aiming for putting your baby to bed drowsy but awake, you have to put them to bed totally awake, but within the earliest part of the sleep window that you can identify, and then assist them as they go through a sleep learning improving process. But think about how your baby falls asleep. That's probably what they're looking for if they're waking up in the middle of the night. So then that would be something that you could work on if your baby was old enough. So Lynette, sounds like your baby would be able to work on that. It's old enough. So you can, if you're looking at all these other things, then look at how your baby falls asleep and see if you can ask them to do it more independently at bedtime, because that would be the practice that they need to be able to do it more independently in the middle of the night. So you can match the level of assistance you give them in the middle of the night that you gave them at bedtime. So when you make a change, it starts with bedtime. All right, another subject to look at is consistency. So if you have read a bunch of books and you try this method for a night and it didn't work, and then try that method for a night and it didn't work, and you try this other method for a night and it didn't work, that inconsistency is going to be confusing. Your baby's not going to know what to expect, and you're not going to know what would have worked if you'd stuck with it. So if you already are in that place where you're trying all kinds of different things and you know you're being inconsistent, choose something that you can be consistent about, even if it's a sleep crutch. So if you're like, nursing to sleep is not what you want to do, and you know that's not where you want to end up, but all these things that you're trying is just causing more crying, but nursing to sleep is easy. Then if you nurse to sleep for 5 or 6 or 10 days in a row, then you're going to have 5 or 6 or 10 days of easy, and you're reestablishing a pattern of consistency, which is a really good place to start, even if that consistent thing that you're doing is a sleep crutch. Then when you've made a plan of what to do to make a change for more independent put down for falling asleep, then when you are consistent about the change, you're coming from a place of consistency. So the baby's expectation is that you'll be consistent about the new thing. So it actually, the whole change process can go a lot faster because you're coming from a place of consistency. Does that make sense? Okay. Now another thing to look at, this is number 6, are medical issues. These are all things that you can't control, but if you know that these things are going on, it helps you to be more patient, or there may be a doctor or a specialist that can help you manage this. So one that I see all the time is tongue tie. When your tongue is tied, it affects the ability to, it can affect the ability to nurse, and so then your baby's going to be more hungry in the middle of the night and they need to be fed more, but it can also affect breathing issues. And so if the tongue is tied, the body may not be getting enough oxygen because of the positioning of the tongue, and that can cause the blood oxygen levels to drop and the baby to wake up. And so that's not something that you can do any sort of sleep training or sleep coaching. You can't sleep coach tongue tie. You have to identify it and then get that resolved. If your baby is uncomfortable because of allergies or asthma or reflux, then those are outside things outside of sleep to look at. And you're just helping your baby to be comfortable because you don't feel comfortable, you can't sleep. And then if you're looking at sleep apnea is another, it's another breathing issue. So everyone that I talk to has frequent waking. And frequent waking is a red flag for a breathing issue that could be caused by tongue tie or sleep apnea or something else. And so I'm looking for other red flags, like if your baby snores, that is a red flag for a breathing issue. If your baby sleeps with their mouth open, that is a red flag for a breathing issue. If your baby sleeps with their butt up in the air, or or any other unusual sleeping position, that's weird, not supposed to happen. If your baby sweats excessively where there's a wet spot under their head, that's an indication that the heart is pumping really hard as if it was exercising just from sleep. And so these are some red flags that I would love to rule out with anyone that I'm talking to, so I know that it's just a sleep issue and not something extra. Lynette?
What's the baby sleeping with their butt up in the air? Kaya does that on her belly with her butt up.
So it's not definitive, but everybody thinks that it's totally normal because photographers love to take pictures of babies in that position because it's so cute. But it could be an indication of a breathing issue because when you're in that position, it really opens up all of these airways. So if you had butt up in the air and frequent waking and snoring or mouth breathing or sweating, then it's like, maybe I should go get this checked out. Tongue tie is the first thing that I like to get looked at because it's easy to assess with someone who knows what they're talking about. And a lot of pediatricians don't know what they're talking about, so you have to get someone who actually does revisions. If they do revisions, then they know what they're talking about. I have had families with a suspected tongue tie or a suspected breathing issue that just got dismissed by multiple pediatricians until finally they found a provider that took them seriously, took a good look, and then they found a major issue that once they resolved, the sleep just fixed itself. It was done. It makes me so frustrated. They had to go through like 4 people that were experts to figure it out. And like, who told you to look for tongue tie? A sleep coach? What? I come across this all the time. And so I'm looking for this, and I'm not going to diagnose anything. I'm just going to tell you the red flags and potential issues that I can see because I'm trained by a renowned pulmonologist just to look for red flags. Because if you can't breathe, you can't sleep. So looking on this list of medical things, sensory sensitivities, temperament, family dynamic, experiences, emotional anxiety, stress, all of those they all affect a baby's sense of security or a child's sense of security. And if you don't feel secure, you can't sleep. So that's another outlier that we need to potentially look at. So temperament traits, children that have very alert temperaments, curious, observant, strong-willed, determined, possibly sensitive, know what they want, hold out till they get it. These children are usually really smart and have a really high IQ potential, and they have a really hard time with sleep because their brain is so busy. And often these kids would do really poorly in a cried out scenario, and it could actually cause an anxiety disorder. So if you think you have a baby or a child with an alert temperament, it's really important to stick with the gentle, responsive, hands-on methods because that helps them to continue to feel secure in a world to them that often feels overwhelming. I do these one-on-one consultations. That's That's what I mostly do all day is I talk to moms one-on-one and I help them with their sleep. But I also have virtual workshops. I have a toddler sleep series and a baby sleep series. And I have a 3-hour workshop that I've done a few times and recorded. And there's mini consultations. There's all kinds of ways that I can help you. But if you go to my website, getquietnights.com, just like Kristen said, there's a series of blog posts and videos and podcasts and all kinds of free tips. And I love talking to moms. So I give everyone a free one-on-one sleep assessment where you just tell me what's going on with your baby and what's bugging you and what would you like it to be. And I can usually just off the top of my head give you some solid tips and identify which direction that you need to go. And then if you wanted to ask me about pricing for other things that I could do for you, you can ask me, but there's no pressure. I love just doing the one-on-one free ones. And I love doing classes like this. If families could get enough sleep, then parents can just focus on being parents and raise up good children, which turn into good citizens, which helps the entire world. So I'm saving the world one family at a time. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a quick question. I'm obviously, this is Teresa, and I'm obviously
Hi,
at the early stage with only a 7-week-old. So I didn't know if most of this information is kind of just not relevant yet because it's too early to even say, like the whole like sleeping with the butt up in the air or, you know, things like that. Is it less relevant because it's still so early, or would you say, like, I don't know.
So
that makes sense?
I speak to new moms within your age group all of the time. And one of the take homes that I'm hoping that you get is that you're not worrying about how many times your baby is waking up in the middle of the night. You're not worrying about restricting feedings. You're not worrying about getting on a sleep schedule yet.
Right.
That right now your job is to get to know your baby, figure out what the sleep cues are, what the hunger cues are, follow them. Everything is going to change. And I hope that it takes some pressure off of you in that all these things that you might read on Facebook or on the internet of all these things that your baby should be doing, because there is no shoulds. The range of normal for your baby's age is so broad that there is no normal. So feed as much as you want, hold as much as you want, rock as much as you want. All of those things are developing a secure foundation. And so not to worry about going to bed asleep. Being consistent
I guess
is helpful.
my question is this. I guess I don't know if this is helpful or if I'm just trying to figure out. I feed him a lot because he had some problems gaining weight at the very beginning. But he's my 4th, and he is my crier. Like he just cries all the time. If he's not being held, he's crying. And so I know that just happens sometimes with colicky babies, but I didn't know if I could be doing something differently or be, like you said, like learning him. I'm doing the best I can with the amount of chaos it is around here, but I just didn't know.
I have 5 kids. I can relate.
Right, exactly. I just didn't know if I should be doing something, like doing the things that you're saying, even though he's still so little, like paying attention to, you know, the signals of sleep and all of that still, even though he's so small, because he cries so much. Everyone's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't know. Like I keep feeding him and he is happy. He doesn't cry when he's feeding. He certainly just stays on there, but I don't know. I don't want to take too much of your time either, but I just thought I'd ask just in case, just because I'm not used to a crier like he is.
Well, he could be a colic. Colic is not a diagnosis. Colic is a description of a baby who is unsettled and fussy for a reason they have not been able to identify. So like colic is not a thing. Like it's not a do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Like
yes.
colic is not
yes,
saying, oh, you have a tongue tie or you have this disorder. Colic means we don't know what's causing it, so we're just going to generally call it colic.
Okay,
and there's all kinds of medical things that could be colic that are difficult to figure out. But your baby is letting you know that he needs to be held. And so he's going through all of this discomfort. He's crying because he's uncomfortable for some reason.
Right.
And so you are co-regulating with him by holding him. And that that is what he's letting you know that he needs.
That's what he
and
needs.
then continue to figure out that he needs you. You are the solution. You are the number one solution. And so get a baby wearing contraption that is
Right.
really comfortable and
Mm-hmm.
wear him a lot. And
Yeah.
anytime that it's safe to be wearing him, you can be wearing him, because that's what makes him happy. And then
Okay.
that will foster the secure base hormones in his brain for all future learning. So when he's crying, it's creating stress on him, and that is affecting the way that the brain is developing. So by holding him, you're fostering that strong attachment that he needs and helping him to, no, this is really cool, helping him to practice dealing with this element in his life that is uncomfortable but indeterminate why. But it's a rough patch in his life, and you are practicing with him dealing with it.
Okay.
So if this continues, and then as he grows up, he is continually easily agitated and overly sensitive and needs a lot of extra snuggles and cuddles and holding
Mm-hmm.
and hugs, then as he grows up, all of that extra attention that you gave him was practice dealing with lifetime problems. So
Yeah.
as he's a teenager, a young adult, and continues to be sensitive and easily irritated, he's probably also going to be very observant and notice more details because he's super observant. Then he's had all this practice dealing with problems, and he could end up being super independent because of all of this extra attention that you're giving him right now.
Right now. Okay. Thank you. I needed to hear that.
There's a book called Colic Solved. It's written by a doctor that goes through a number of areas that you could look at. Reflux and tongue tie are some tricky ones that get missed, that cause things that cause discomfort. But while you're trying to figure out what is making him uncomfortable, you get to help him to practice dealing with it by keeping him right next to you, because that's what makes him feel better.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, Teresa, thank you for, Kristen, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Any other quick questions before we sign off? Okay.
I'm really glad you recorded it because I'm going to have to watch it again.
Yeah.
But no, thank you very much, Tracy. I feel like just in a couple of, things you said really kind of hit home. So I look forward to kind of looking through that and then potentially reaching out too. But thank you. Really appreciate your being here.
Good. I love to hear what people's light bulb moments. Does that make sense? Is that a dumb phrase to say your light bulb moment? I'm thinking of that Minions movie where the Gru always says light bulb, and when he gets an idea.
No, it definitely makes sense.
What are your
Good. For me, Vienna is a really bad napper, or so I thought. But I think more so I'm not recognizing her cues and getting her to sleep when I should, potentially. She definitely needs help to fall asleep. She isn't going to just do it. So that was one for me for sure. It's like, oh, I'm sure she would be a better sleeper if I just was more aware of her windows. So that was certainly one. And also just the idea of catching the window early, and not waiting till, not needing to wait until she's yawning and rubbing her eyes, but realizing that pay attention to the earlier things. Because sometimes I'll notice that, and then I'm like, oh, okay, it's time to start getting ready for sleep. Well, then I've obviously missed it by the end of that. So those two things were the light bulb moments for me today. So thank you.
Excellent. Your baby is actually more likely, their potential for a solid nap that's a full sleep cycle or longer, that potential is a lot higher if you help them fall asleep earlier in the sleep window. So those early tired signs, they're tricky and subtle and sometimes hard to catch, but it's worth a lot of attention. I have this trick that if you think that you're in the 90-minute wakeful window or the 2-hour wakeful window, use your smart speaker, a timer, your microwave speaker, your Siri. Tell them to set, when your baby gets up, tell them to set a timer and go 15 minutes earlier than you think that wake window might be. And set a timer. So I was like, hey Siri, set a timer for 80 minutes. And then, no, not really. She's listening. And then when the timer goes off, eyes on your baby like a hawk, try to figure out what those subtle things are that they're doing. And then you don't even have to think about it for the first 80, 75 or 80 minutes. The timer goes off, like, okay, oh, time to really zone in and watch for tired signs to figure out what those subtle cues are.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tracy. I learned a lot, and it was really good to see everybody. So thank you all for coming too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tracy and Kristen.
Thank you. So give me a call if you want a free sleep assessment, and then I'll give you some personalized tips, and then we can take it from there.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.